Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we explore the theory of the intellectual according to Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was an early 20th century Italian Marxist philosopher and writer. While imprisoned, he wrote much of his work, and his most famous being the prison notebooks. His theory of the intellectual and cultural hegemony are among his two most notable ideas. Cutting through all the Gramscian verboseness, which is common among Marxist and Hegelian writers, we'll examine Gramsci's understanding of the intellectual and why his theory of the intellectual is very much part of 21st century thought shouting. Gramsci, according to him, believed that all persons could be intellectuals. As he says, all men are intellectuals. This is because we are all endowed with the mind, and that mind comes with the ability of having consciousness. Thus, the role of the intellectual, for Gramsci, is to create a new consciousness for a social strata that can bring meaning and understanding to one's position in society and their role in life. Thus, intellectuals serve as the glue that keeps society together and in some degree of harmony. Gramsci's intellectuals are fit in a traditional dialectical reading. There are the intellectuals of the superstructural and ideological class of the prevailing structure. These are the so-called conservative intellectuals who defend structures of power and class. Then you also have, from Gramsci's perspective, another class of intellectuals who are the inheritors and the sustainers of the established superstructures, those who try to gain by being attached to those who defend the existing power structures and cultural values of society. Furthermore, you have the new intellectuals, the intellectuals to whom Gramsci belonged and advocated, the proletariat or the Marxist intellectuals, who are attempting to expose the power structures of society and the warped intellectuality of those who defend them. This class of intellectuals are those who advance human consciousness toward the oppressed social strata. Thus, you have the dialectic of empowered versus oppressed, oppressor and oppressed. This group of intellectuals, the radical or Marxist intellectuals, are the organic head of the underclass, so to speak. They are the thinking aspect of all the underclass groups. They are the brain of underclass society. For Gramsci, the intellectual puts into intellectual capacity what the less educated and the more material oppressed underclass is incapable of doing because of their oppression. Rather than seeing themselves as apart, separated from the class of people to whom they belong, they act on behalf of the class and the body of people whom they represent. It is interesting to know that Gramsci's intellectual isn't concerned with truth in the traditional metaphysical sense. Rather, the intellectual is tasked with providing the consciousness of a particular oppressed class or group in society for the purpose of politics. Thus, the intellectual serves not truth, not metaphysics, not even the intellect, but serves politics. Now, Gramsci's true intellectual are, of course, Marxist intellectuals, those middle or upper class intellectual radicals who agitate on behalf of the oppressed working class. The importance of these intellectuals is important in the positions of media and university because it is through the media and universities, the academies, that these intellectuals can have their most powerful impact in expanding consciousness and awareness of the position within society that various people find themselves within the overarching structures of superstructures, ideologies, and class conflict. Gramsci then agrees with Lenin that the intellectuals serve as the political vanguard that work and labor to bring awareness of the underclass's real disposition in society, and through that awareness, heighten class consciousness, and of course, eventually, the revolution can emerge. And the best mediums in which the intellectuals of the underclasses can speak to advance class consciousness and the revolutionary dialectic is through the media and the academy, because these are the mediums to which most people will have some degree of access to. The emergence of the mass media in Gramsci's time, as well as the expansion of academies and the university to a new swath of people, meant that these mediums, more than any other, had greater access to a large population of people. In a word, we can describe the role of Gramsci's intellectual as a propagandist or a thought leader. The role of the intellectual is to repeat endlessly the narratives that bring about the improvement of oppressed consciousness. In Gramsci's thought, if you agree, of course, with Gramsci's neo-dialectical Marxism, the propagandists are the elite intellectuals who have the understanding of the defense of narratives and power structures, because those are the propagandists, so to speak, the people who defend the superstructures, while the propagandists or the thought leaders in the Gramscian Marxist disposition are really the true heroes, the real intellectuals in Gramsci's word, because again, for Gramsci, the propagandist is the individual who defends the superstructure. The real intellectual is the one who exposes the superstructure. Though, of course, for those of us who don't consider ourselves Gramscian or Marxian, we can see Gramsci's intellectual as, of course, the same image of the propagandist or the thought leader that they critique, because they simply ad nauseum and endlessly promote a specific narrative for their own purposes. Since the oppressed underclass is incapable of consciousness on its own, it becomes necessary for the real intellectual, in Gramsci's outlook, to act on behalf of the incapable underclass to advance their revolutionary consciousness. Once the intellectuals take the lead, like the vanguard in politics, the underclass will follow, and as the underclass follows, so will the revolution. What is the role of the intellectual, according to Gramsci, the real intellectual? To advance social and class consciousness for the purposes of revolutionary consciousness within the dialectic of oppressor and oppressed. Specifically, it is to make the underclass aware of their oppression and position within structural society, and in that awareness, they will eventually fight for their liberation on behalf of the intellectuals who brought that awareness to them. The entire purpose of the intellectual is to advance revolutionary politics.